always talk about cooperation, and obviously we all want to practice as ethically as the profession demands of us, and even beyond for our own personal views on ethics and integrity. But for someone like you that knows so much about this, do you never get the urge to use your powers for evil, to try to take advantage of counsel who may not, I don't want to say take advantage, but you know what I mean? Like a counsel who may not be as sophisticated on the eDiscovery side. Not every lawyer is smart as every lawyer. Not every lawyer is as good in their domain as every lawyer. When it comes to cooperation and technical competence, can't that be used tactically to give your client an advantage if you just simply know way more than opposing counsel?
Is there that's a heavy, yeah, that's a heavy.
Is there an ethical obligation to force cooperation with someone who just intellectually is not on par with someone who's obviously a top expert in the field?
So I think that really ties right into how people develop strategies, right? So I would say that I come to the practice of law developing strategies that many of my peers and people who came before me might find different, odd, unique, pick your word, because in your example, if somebody on the other side of me doesn't know better, I'm not interested in surreptitiously taking advantage. That doesn't sit well with me in terms of my human core. I'm a faithful person, so that doesn't sit right with me. What does sit right with me is to know that that person does not know as much, and for me to offer an olive branch in such a way that, hi, you've said this, that's actually not consistent with what the rules say, nor is it consistent with the precedential case law that's developed. I would encourage you to give that a look. Now,
like that nefarious shot across the bow.
Okay, so I've now said, hello, I've let you know that something is up. I'm not going to walk you through all of it, although there are some people who have been our adversaries who have said, actually, no, you can't do that. If you were to do that, this is what could happen. What you should be considering is this, this, and this, and we can give that a try together. And again, it's an olive branch to say, I know something that you clearly don't. I'm giving you an opportunity to correct yourself. And there's a risk you could correct yourself to my disadvantage. You could suddenly go out and get some smarty pants who comes in and tries to blow me out of the water. But I don't foresee that happening. Plus, I have good alliances who would, shore me up further. But moreover, if you don't take that olive branch, if you don't hone in and own up to what you need to know, now my strategy is to keep on trucking right past you. And if I end up before a court, I maintain my credibility because I get to say, Judge, I gave this person every opportunity. At this meet and confer, I suggested that he or she look at this. During this, dispute, I offered this example. They took me up on nothing. So we're here today. I've now just spent the last 4 months in a case where I'm being paid contingently, i.e. I have not been paid yet. They've been paid every hour, probably every 30-day cycle, and they seem not to get it. So I'd like to not waste more of my time. It's actually against my economic model. This has worked for them for their economic model. I think we've got to get this back into balance.
If I can distill from that, whenever we talk about cooperation, or you see a CLE on the cooperation proclamation, oftentimes at the end of these programs, you often get that practitioner raising her or his hand saying, well, what do I do when there's simply a pugilistic opposing counsel and they're not cooperative, they're not working with me? And sometimes those tactical answers aren't very clear, but if I could distill from what you said, there's actually a survival tip in there. We all look at this misconstrued concept of zealous advocacy that doesn't actually even exist. It's the practice of law is supposed to be more collaborative. And essentially my role here is to play devil's advocate a little bit when I was asking you about the using your talents for evil. But I think that if you have counsel, whether they're not competent as they otherwise should be when it comes to technology, oftentimes that does come out in a bit of aggressive behavior in other ways. And I think that rather than trying to overly teach somebody or offering them a huge olive branch by saying that type of thing, hey, I'm going to give you an opportunity to reconsider that. Even that alone is a cooperative tactic, because not only are you kind of pumping the brakes, and that's a decent way to talk to somebody who might otherwise be kind of combative, right? You're not kowtowing to them, you're not being overly nice to them, but you're taking a middle ground and saying, hey, I'm going to let you reconsider that. And then that does set you up later down the road to go to the judge and show that you're being reasonable. And I think that's a really interesting tactic, to try and to pause a little bit and give someone another opportunity, whether they're acting in a quote unquote incompetent way, if you will, or if they're just being a jerk.
Yeah.
So I like that. That's really
Yeah. One of the things, I mean, in talking about my appearing on your podcast here, we talked about the cooperation proclamation and sort of the construct of all of that. And it forced me to think about it more intently than I had in quite some time. So one of the things that I always hold close to myself is that as a lawyer, we are officers of the court. Okay, that is a very, very important element or fundamental for me. It's always lived with me from the moment that I, was sworn in. I just took that so seriously. And I started thinking about the cooperation construct and why is it that it's important to me to carry that through? It's because I want to engage with people authentically. I want to do my best for my client. And part of my strategy to do my best for my client is to make as much progress as possible. Part of that progress is engaging the other side, whether it's in dialogue, problem solving, whatever it is. And so I think people get really hung up on this concept of cooperation proclamation and, oh, that's antithetical to zealous representation, which, they're missing the point. And I will say the construct has resonated with me in particular during COVID. So we were really fortunate. Tadler Law, because we were new, right? So we launched in 2019, June 2019. I was insistent that we put in place the best technology that we could put in place then. Hardware, software, tools. 3 weeks before the shutdown, we went as an entire firm to do Microsoft training, Microsoft team training together. So we already were positioned to utilize that tool and also were accustomed to this collaborative nature. Now you get into the shutdown, we all know what we saw. We saw people really struggling, people whom we know, great lawyers, great professionals, struggling because their places of business maybe didn't have the hardware or software. They were not accustomed to being on a video camera all the time. There are lots of professionals out there, lawyers and others, who are actually introverts. They could be the best trial lawyer ever, but they're otherwise introverts. And now you're asking them to be on 5 to 7 days a week on a camera.
Sure.
Right? It doesn't work for everybody. So to me, during COVID, I started thinking about when things would get hot in cases where people would start yelling and getting unpleasant. I would always say, let's take a minute. Why don't we take a break? Or, you know what? How's your family? Just pivot the conversation for a few seconds. And I will say this, I've been pretty outspoken, Matt, with some judges, both in cases, but also in a conference or webinar setting, where I have said, we all, as a practice, lawyers, judges, staff, we need to be mindful that we have gone from a profession that everybody would say, oh, right, lawyers, they work around the clock, et cetera. No, no, no. The last 2 years, we've worked around the clock. It's not a 5-day week. It's not a 6-day week. It's a 7-day week. And guess what? The day starts and never ends. It's like living in Alaska or Iceland. Pick your place.
Sure.
And I have had times where I have said, I am not going to push my people any harder. This case, we're not saving lives in this one, and I'm not going to kill mine. Can't do it. We're dealing with human beings. And by the way, the reason that we're having more disputes in certain cases, not so much now because things have opened up, but when it was really intense during the lockdown, it was because everybody had cabin fever. You had no idea what was going on in people's homes. You know, in-home learning, people who are your adversaries and you know they've got small children at home. Have some empathy. Have some empathy. And that has really connected with me for this cooperation construct. It is this consciousness that, yes, you represent your client, I represent my client, we have responsibilities. We also will do better if we are conscious human beings. We think about what we're saying. Again, intention and impact. What is it that we're trying to achieve? How would we like to get there? I'd like to get there without having an ulcer myself.
Sure, sure. Well, I think the notion too of cooperation, again, it was always seemed to be anathema to this misnomer of zealous advocacy. But I think it's cooperation not just with opposing counsel, but also with the court, with all the parties involved. But I think I really like this idea that if you are a good lawyer, if you are the best practitioner you can be, even in the face of stress, if you know what you're doing, you don't have to be one of those hard charging, jerky lawyers to get the job done. I came up as a lawyer, but that was still really the notion of being a lawyer. You know, you were hard charging, you were very aggressive, and that's the way I viewed a good lawyer. I'm completely changed. I have way more respect and interest in learning from folks who can do things in a way that they win, they get the best results for their clients, but they do so in a way that really reflects personal integrity and really compassion and empathy for everybody involved. And if I could, I want to focus briefly on the concept of empathy as it pertains to cooperation in the practice of law. One very interesting concept that I want to talk to you about is empathetic Stoicism. And we'll pick up with that concept right now.